ideally, yes, we should be in a place where you can say that you don't see color and that's all right. But that would be the case only if there were no racism at all.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Gorm TV. My name is Mamobo Ogoro. We are a web show and creative network that dissects the social issues that affect Ireland's multicultural generation. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the concept of colorblindness and whether it is something we eventually want to get to. As a society, we always think that, okay, we eventually want to be in a world where everyone is seen as equal and everyone is have equal access to opportunity, which can come across in this sort of concept of colorblindness, let's say. So I kind of wanted to delve into it and seeing, okay, is it actually a bad thing to say, okay, I want to live in a world where nobody sees race? Let's talk about that. So does anyone, I know Eric has a definition for us that we can just work off and have discussion there.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one, colorblindness, because it's quite ambiguous. I think it's really down to how people interpret it. Of course, there's the optical kind of ailment. I won't call it an ailment. Some people are born and they're colorblind, but in the context of race, even people who are colorblind can see kind of race. They can see the differences when we're speaking of race. But I think there are two other predominant definitions that I've definitely come to know and I've seen people discuss. The first is one that's based upon, I think, rightful complaints that people make or wage against people who try to evade of their responsibility of kind of acknowledging the racial issues that people face within society. This kind of statement that I'm colorblind can probably be coupled with the statement, I have a black friend. You know, these two are kind of outcast statements that people refer to sometimes to make it look as if they just cannot be racist for whatever reason. And I think it tends to be people who are caught out for their prejudices that refer to those two statements as a get-out-free card, again, to evade the responsibility of acknowledging what they might have said that is wrong. But I think the more profound form of colorblindness that I think what I've just acknowledged, the kind of get-out-free card, unfortunately has clouded and has prevented and precluded a lot of us from being able to acknowledge is the ethical principle of colorblindness. You know, colorblindness isn't like, when one says to me, I don't see color, or I believe in the colorblind principle, it's not literal. It's not that I don't see your race. It's like calling someone warm-hearted. I saw this from an author in America who was speaking about it. He said, when you call someone warm-hearted, you're not talking about the temperature of their hearts. You're saying that they're a kind person. So if you say that I believe in the colorblind ethic, you're not necessarily saying I'm not going to acknowledge the nuances of race and racism. You're instead saying that I want to treat you without regard to your race. And I think colorblindness in this sense, the ethical principle, which is somewhat utopian to some extent in terms of getting to a society where we don't acknowledge race, I think it's a really good North Star to have in how we navigate ourselves in society. If you look at, I don't know, picking someone for a job, for instance, or admissions to university or colleges here in Ireland, for example, I think it's important for us to acknowledge inequality and the like. But all in all, we should ensure that race is not a barrier to access to anything. And the opposite of colorblindness, race consciousness, can produce barriers. It can produce racism. It can produce people judging people because of the color of their skin. At worst, that's what race consciousness can produce. But colorblindness, on the other hand, at the very worst, can see people not acknowledge challenges people face because of their race. But I think a nuanced form of colorblindness, in terms of the ethic and the principle, I think could really help to enhance how we engage with conversations about racism. And I'll just conclude briefly by saying that, I always in these conversations point to Martin Luther King. I think he's such a fantastic example because his form of what I'd like to call colorblindness in terms of the ethic, it was rooted in his Christianity. He believed that because everyone is born in the image of God, everyone is to be treated equally, irregardless of race. He was almost a champion of this ethical principle. Yet in modern kind of activism, I think because of the I don't see race types who try to evade of their responsibility, we overlook the power of the form of colorblindness that was embraced by King to bring about the changes that he brought about in America. So I think we need to start considering how we can use a nuanced form of colorblindness to do good.
Thank you so much, Eric, for that in detail definition and your personal opinions. I think it's really important when we're talking about this concept, like you said, to have like a more nuanced sort of relationship to talking about, let's say, race relations or color blindness. I know Tiziana wanted to add something to the conversation.
Yeah, I agree with Eric when he said that it's a utopian idea. I mean, I think that's the ultimate goal. So I hope one day we'll be in a society where we can afford not to think about, race at all. But for the moment, I think we have to do that, because the reality is that many people are judged on the basis of the color of their skin or what they look and sound like. And so it's not uncommon for people to experience racism based on and xenophobia based on their characteristics. And so I think an example is that of Black people experiencing more or higher unemployment rates than other people in Ireland. I was reading a report by Ibn Joseph about that, for example, or people with foreign sounding names not being called for job interviews as much as people with more common names or white sounding names or whatever. So I think, yeah, it is. It's a tricky one, because ideally, yes, we should be in a place where you can say that you don't see color and that's all right. But that would be the case only if there were no racism at all, and that's not the case. And even though race is a social construct, it has a lot of ramifications on people access to education, jobs, and other important things and milestones in life. So yeah, I think we need to acknowledge that, and it's the only way to try and change the systems.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Tiziana. I actually I was recently in the speaking engagement with Dr. Evan Joseph as well, and she did speak on that research, and it was really enlightening. And one of the things that she said about that was the importance of like gathering ethnicity-based or race-based statistics and like data of like employees or university students and things like that. So do we think that's actually, this is just a question for the rest of you to be thinking while I move on to May and Sandrine, but do we think that is a step moving forward or heading towards like what Eric was saying in terms of like, what was Eric, something about race consciousness? Eric, what did you say again? Was it race
consciousness?
Race consciousness. Do you think that is sort of like building equity or like swinging the pendulum? That's just an exaggeration, but just to get our minds flowing. But I'm going to move on to May. May, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to say I totally agree with everything that's already been said. And I think that in theory, colorblindness sounds like the best option for everybody. But the problem is even if one individual or only a handful of individuals claim to be colorblind, that won't work, because the system has to be colorblind, society has to be colorblind for colorblindness to work. Because the reality is, because of the media we consume, like most people have inherent biases and they're inherently racist. So like everybody is racist, even if like the subconsciously, like obviously not like spewing like hate speech or anything, but they just have like small thoughts that like just like invasive thoughts that like just like kind of that color like their judgment of somebody. And another problem with colorblindness, I think, is that if you don't see color, you don't see patterns. So for example, with the shooting in Atlanta, Georgia on the 16th, like 6 Asian women were killed. So, but if you were colorblind and you didn't see race or color, you would say that was a very sad like mass shooting. You wouldn't say that was a horrendous hate crime if you don't see color.
Definitely. And I think in those cases as well, just going on the Georgia killing, it was horrible, and it really highlighted the fact of the rise of Asian hate going on in the United States. And that's another conversation that needs to happen. But in terms of that colorblindness thing, it's a lot of times it evades the racial undertones in situations like that. So I can see where you're going from there. May, thank you. Sandrine, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I think it's a great topic, and I think it's something that we've talked about anyways, and I've talked about it and went on rants about it to different people. I agree with what Eric said. I think with colorblindness, there's different layers. So like the first layer I see, if when someone says to me they don't see color, it's privilege. You have to be so lucky to occupy a world where you will never see, like if your friend doesn't get a job or doesn't get a certain opportunity or anything like that, to just view it as they just weren't good enough. It had nothing to do with the societal institutional element of it, which is destined for someone of color there to fail at that pedestal. I think it is a very privileged situation to be in. And I think like the issue when you do say I don't see color, you're just taking away from the experience of that person. So like in that regard, it's like when I have a predominantly white friends, so when I do talk about like certain things to do with racism, and they're just like, oh, do you know, I just see your Sandrine, not my black friend Sandrine. And I'm like, so you haven't listened to absolutely anything I've just said in regards to the ill treatments I've gotten. And I think that's the really dangerous part, where people, again, they're confronted with this when they're faced with racism. Their first action is to retaliate and be like, well, that's not me, so like I don't see that. But then it's like, again, you are diminishing and like just brushing aside your friend's experience of racism just because, again, you're in that privileged situation to see it. But like the other side of it, like the different layer of it, I think color blindness, or like, again, living in a world where race determines absolutely everything, is kind of dangerous in that regards. Like, let's say when it comes to, for me, I always see it like in regards to friendships or dating. If you're literally just conditioned into that world of only being friends with people that look like you, have the same experiences as you, or loving someone who looks like you, like I think that's where color blindness comes in wrong, because we should be able to see people just as individuals. We should be able to love people as individual and not have something such as race be a barrier into, again, like accessing that friendship or relationship. But I think even within those spectrums of friendship and relationship, you have to acknowledge that your partner is a different race. You have to acknowledge they occupy the world differently, and they're going to receive treatments differently. And I think, again, like I always say, like, yes, in an ideal world, it'd be great to live in a world where race isn't a factor, but race is intersectionalized in every aspect of us. Like, you know, like race is connected with gender, it's connected with class. So I think to remove that, you are removing someone's identity, and like it's up to the individual, again, to just be like, I don't agree with you because over X, Y, and Z. But for me personally, I always foremost like if I'm talking about an issue and if it's being brushed aside, just being like, oh, it's just Sandrine, and it's not looking at why this specific issue has affected me because of my race, I think that you're like inherently just silencing my experience just to, again, be in that privileged situation, because you know it'll never happen. So just understanding how colorblindness works in those spectrums, but also seeing that dangerous aspect of it, of only being in one color chamber. So like just to understand it in that regard.
Thank you so much, Sandrine. What I was hearing from what you're speaking was that it's a balance of like being conscious of your racial surroundings, but at the same time not making that like the forefront to your decisions or the way you go about in life, but being conscious at that there are in systems anyway, and in structures in our society, that there are racial undertones or racial biases that do exist there that we need to actually acknowledge. So thank you, Sandrine. I'm going to move on to Shane there. Shane, do you have any takes?
Yeah, just kind of going on what May said, just regarding the recent shooting in Atlanta, and just from kind of a different kind of viewpoint as well. Like if you're colorblind as well, you fail to see that most of the perpetrators of this kind of violence are generally speaking white as well. So you're going to fail to miss that as well if you're supposedly colorblind. I think when most people, from my experience anyway, when they say that they are colorblind, or when they think they're colorblind, it's usually that they're not aggressively racist, or they don't use racist language. They don't like it just for in social circles and stuff like that. They wouldn't leave anyone of any other ethnicity kind of out, or be approachable to those different kinds of ethnicities, but not actually noticing, because these kind of people, generally speaking, white people, have experienced such privilege that they just fail to recognize their own privilege, and they fail to recognize the experience of other ethnicities. I think that's that's the issue at hand with colorblindness, and fail to recognize the different kind of biases within society, the different kind of biases within themselves as well. Like, again, the bias towards the reaction of the shooter. Oh, this person was just at the end of the tether because they were a white person. But if it was, you know, anyone of any other ethnicity, you know, a white person, a Muslim person, you know, we fail to recognize these white people as what they are, which is terrorists. And the language that is used for people of different races is completely different. So we need to definitely recognize that.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you. And that, coming from that, language is super important when it comes to describing these sort of things. And like in the case of the shooting, like the way that he was described, the shooter was described, we can argue totally different to the way other people of different ethnicities that did the same thing would be described. So it's important to know how language is and how language is perpetuated in the media as well. So that's super important. I'm going to move on to Eric. Eric, do you have any more takes to that?
Yeah, just two brief things to add to all the things everyone said already. Firstly, I think from what has been said thus far, I definitely think we can situate everything, and this is mainly drawn on what Sandrine said, on a spectrum, where the worst form of colorblindness, let's say to the left, is us just ignoring the fact that race exists, and there's a lot of different connotations that are attached to race that we need to acknowledge. Racial issues, racism, and the like. And on the other side of colorblindness is extreme race consciousness, which breeds the racist instances that we're speaking of, because those who perpetrate acts of violence upon people because of the color of their skin are operating on a aggressively race conscious way, in an aggressively race conscious way. And then our reaction to that have to be race-based because we're speaking about racial issues, but speaking to that race conscious nature that initiated the action in the first place, which isn't a bad thing. So I think there definitely is a spectrum, and we need to know when to apply which philosophy. So when it comes to race consciousness, we need to know to apply it when we're speaking to issues that people face because of the color of their skin. But I still believe that when it comes to, again, as Tiziana said, when it comes to that utopian vision of a society we want, when it comes to that North Star, which we may never reach, you know, a lot of us have aspirations to hopefully live in a world where there are no wars, no hatred, and these North Stars, these kind of visualizations we have of society, we may never reach them. But I think it's worth having one that sees us not treating one another based on the color of our skin. And I still think King was right in taking this approach in the civil rights movement, where he faced aggressive hatred because of the color of his skin, and he had every right not to take that approach. So I think it's something that we can strive for now as a utopian objective.
Definitely, I totally agree with that, and I think that moving towards that, I personally believe that in my lifetime I'm not going to live in a world where race is not going to be or ethnicity or someone's cultural or heritage is not going to be a barrier to them accessing something. I just think that we can work towards that because that's what we're doing here. But that's, I think I'm not going to see it in my lifetime. And I think it's something that we continuously have to work as human beings to get there. And I think, like, once that race aspect is like done, for lack of a better term, something else is going to be there that we need to work as a community to get towards. So Gareth, did you have something to add to this as well?
Yeah, it was just something that Sandrine said about intersectionality kind of resonated with me, because what I see in today's society with some people that I talk to is they view certain social issues as very binary, that they exist by themselves. One in particular is that I see is mental health, that they see mental health as just a binary issue by itself, when in reality it's affected by all these different social issues. Like, I view social issues like mental health, racism, homophobia as this whole kind of interconnected web, rather than binary issues. And when I was talking to one person, they view very much mental health as a very separate issue to everything else going on in the world. And I just don't see how people can do that. And this is where I feel like if we start doing that, we can't tackle like poor mental health without acknowledging factors like race, because it is dominant in today's society. And it's great on a personal level if you don't view race as an issue, but like, we have to acknowledge on a societal level that this is affecting other parts of society, like people's mental health and we need to acknowledge that. I don't think it's productive to ignore that, like, the Black experience of living in Ireland is completely different to the white experience. We just can't ignore that fact just because, oh, we're tackling mental health, we're not dealing with racism, when it could be one person, the fact that they have poor mental health is because they face racism every single day. So I think as a society, there are certain points where race has to be acknowledged, and that's just unavoidable. And I hope one day that, yeah, we reach that utopian kind of future where when people sit down, it's not racism that's affecting their mental health or whatever other issue that they have. But I think in the here and now, regarding other social issues, we need to acknowledge the fact that race does play a very intricate part in the social order, and especially in Ireland's social order.
Definitely, I totally echo that as well. Like, it's important to understand the intersectionality between like different aspects of the human experience. Like you said there, Gareth, like mental health, race, sexuality, religion, they're not mutually exclusive. They all play and they all mingle with each other in someone's individual experience on Earth. So it's important to highlight all of them in different spheres of our community as well. Sandrine, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, it was just to go back to what both Eric and Shane were saying, because I think Shane made a really good point in saying, like, when it comes to color blindness, it doesn't mean that the individual who says that is like inherently racist or anything like that. And I think it's something that's really, really important to point out. So I kind of say it like in regards to when people don't want to acknowledge race, it's just on the mere fact that racism is such a controversial topic till this day. Do you know, like, and it kind of goes back to what we've talked about in regards to cancel culture and anything like that, and accountability culture. So like sometimes the people do say that they just do not want to engage in that, and like they do know, like, if someone is talking about, again, like that factor of like, why can I not just be seen as a woman, why can I not just be seen as Sandrine instead of Black Sandrine or anything like that? They know that that's how the society is. They know that it's not going to change anytime soon, so they just don't want to engage in that. And like, again, the best way to engage in this conversation of color blindness is just like, again, just finding the definition of it, talking about race and how, as Gareth has pointed out, it plays so many factors and so many roles in it. So like, just because like it doesn't affect you, again, it's so dangerous because we've already seen it, like it's an integral part in society. So but I just do think like the best way to find that middle ground with what Eric was saying is through education, and it is through conversations like this. So like when people are talking about it, they can be like, do you not understand why my experience is shaped by this? But I hope that I can live in a society where, again, like if I'm applying for a job and I don't get it, the race will never come into mind. Because I think like even for people of color who go through that, because like I'm a firm believer, I don't like bringing race into anything, or like, again, viewing myself as like Black before I just view myself just my own individual identity. But it's something like with what Eric said, it's always a part of my consciousness. You know, like if I apply for something and let's say if I get an opportunity, I'm like, I might whatever, like ticking a diversity box, because again, race goes into that with diversity. If I apply for a job and I don't get it, is it because of my last name, or is it because they found out I was this? So I think like even within those individuals which are people of color, like it's a very hard thing to move away from, because again, time and time we've seen how society has set up those roadblocks where you just like, you can't escape it. You can't literally live in a world where you're like, I didn't get that because my CV wasn't good. So it's something that's always in the back of your head. But in order to do that, both the people which don't see it and the people which are experiencing it just have to engage in these topics, like what you're doing today, like setting it up to really understand, to be like, okay, how can I be talking about colorblindness again without accusing someone who has in the past say that they genuinely don't see it? Because again, it's just in the mere fact of maybe they see it, but they don't know how to understand it. And again, you're just being mindful of, if I say something wrong and if I do acknowledge that you're not getting this because you're Black, how am I not victimizing you? So just moving away from that. But like the best way is through these conversations with people which do see colorblindness and which don't, because that's the only way to bridge that gap.
I totally agree. Thank you, Sandrine, for that take. And it just reminded me of my own experience. Like I remember growing up and like not wanting to see race, even though I knew race was a factor in my everyday life, just like it aggravating me when something like racism would happen. I'm like, can you just see me for myself first and not see me for the Black person? But it's really important that those things are highlighted in conversations like this, because in order to move towards that, I kind of like to call it conscious colorblindness, where we are aware of the histories that have happened. We are aware of the racial undertones that do exist in our society, but we know that there is this like idea that everyone is born equal and things like that, and that's where we want to move forward. But it's just really important to understand, and I really liked your piece there, Sandrine, where you were speaking that it is important that people that may not like people that are aware of the colorblindness, and then people are like that think colorblindness should be like not like colorblindness where you just like forget about people's racial backgrounds. They have those kind of conversations in between themselves to kind of understand the undertones that do exist. So thank you for that. I'm going to move to Tiziana and then Eric.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something because Gareth reminded me of something that I was reading a few weeks ago. So apparently there was a major IT company and some employers were experiencing racism, and all the HR people did was to send them to a counselor or to give them mental health help without addressing the racism itself. So I don't know if you came across this news, but I think it's quite shocking. You know, I mean, if you experience racism, mental health help can help, but it's not the same. You should also try and hold the person who is doing that responsible and trying and combat the racism in the workplace. So I think that's not enough. And yeah, so I was shocked about this, and I don't know if it's just in that particular company or if it's something that many companies do. I'm not sure, but I was wondering.
Thanks, Tiziana. I really kind of thought that in terms of, I haven't seen that report, but in terms of like school, it just reminded me of like school and bullying, and how racist-based bullying is often just seen as like normal bullying, and they just send the child to, let's say, counseling and things like that, without actually tackling the undertones of racism that was within the circumstance. So it's really important to highlight those kind of things. Thanks, Tiziana. Eric, did you have something you wanted to highlight again?
I actually think the term colorblindness it should probably be abandoned. I think it has too many connotations, and I think the philosophy of colorblindness cannot be grasped by the term, because when people hear colorblindness, their mind goes to so many other things that are so valid that people have unfortunately associated with colorblindness. I think it's worth noting, though, that racism is race-based, and with the example Tiziana pointed to, for example, you can't fix a race-based problem with a colorblind solution. You need to acknowledge race to be able to tackle issues that arise because of race. But lastly, and pointing to what was stated previously, once more, I think, again, in terms of that philosophy of colorblindness, I use the term utopian quite frequently. In terms of that, I think it's in that context, it's important to know that racism cannot be conceived from that philosophy at all. It merely can't, on a philosophical standpoint. If I treat everyone here as my brothers and sisters, irregardless of the color of your skin, there is no room for me to be racist. But if I treat everyone here in a racially conscious way, there is room for me to be racist. And if I do that and you want to respond to it, you have to respond to it in a racially conscious way. Then we dig a rabbit hole that we all fall into. And I think here in Ireland, we're in a very defining stage when it comes to race relations. So we need to be conscious of the different philosophies and methods that are available by looking at countries like the USA and the methodologies used there, and in South Africa, a country with a profound history of race, to see how we want to steer the conversation forward in a way that's good for everyone, and hopefully acknowledges the challenges that exist at this point in time because of race, but acknowledges the future we want to get to in terms of hopefully getting to a place where we treat people without regard to race.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I think that's a future, like you said, Ireland is like in a pivotal moment where we could steer in either one direction or the other. And it's important that we do with education, with people who are doing, like myself, PhDs, with people who are doing PhDs and people who are academics in the area to actually study study these topics and actually get a grasp of it, so we can actually have the methodologies there to see what way we can move forward. But it's another story to actually get that to the public. But yes, Sarah, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, no, exactly. I stayed quiet purposely. I wanted to hear everyone out first before, it was this topic that I kind of sat with me for the week thinking about it, because I probably would admit that I was guilty at one point of saying to a friend that, I don't see color. And I kind of questioned myself in the sense that, why did I say that, and as someone who's, brown, as, a person of color, why did I say that at that time, and I remember saying it at that time because it wasn't to invalidate the person's experience, it was basically to say, look, no matter what, I'm a safe space. I'm your friend, and I'd see you for who you are, doesn't mean necessarily that I ignore or do not understand, the privileges that I have as a person of color in comparison to my friend who was Black, So I completely understand the experiences that she was going through and so on. And I think it was a mutual understanding that we had, and I don't think it had impacted her in a negative sense. So sometimes I wonder, when people do say to us, oh, I'm colorblind or I don't see color, is it a way of comforting to say that I am a safe space and I understand I understand in the sense I empathize with what you're going through, and I want to try and change that, and change that by understanding more and more. So that was one thing that came into my head, like kind of before I jumped in and saying, yes, absolutely, colorblindness and so on. And I completely agree with everyone that what they were saying there. And kind of what a question that came to my head was like, what do we do next? Because, what do we do from now, like in regards to colorblindness, like in the sense that, should we be colorblind, in the sense that, isn't diversity a positive thing and a thing that we should embrace? And this is just playing devil's advocate and looking at it from a different angle, and an angle that I kind of feel uncomfortable with looking at through, so should we be looking at it in that way? Because I know, for example, children understand race from the age of 3 years old, you know what I mean? And they can actually start to have racial biases themselves. So children from a very young age understand different skin color tones and so on, and understand things. So I'm trying to understand, like, what is next? Should it be that we actually embrace each other's diversity and not be colorblind in the sense that, it's instead of looking for this utopian like aspect of we all look at each other as Mamobo, as Sarah, as May, and that's it, that way. But it's like kind of like, actually no, Sarah is Irish Arab and Sarah is of brown skin tone, and I embrace Sarah for who Sarah is and everything that goes with Sarah, that way. So is that how we should be going about it, rather than trying to eliminate the whole concept of race? That's just again, devil's advocate, something completely different that I'm bringing to the table, to maybe is something for us to think about as people of color and as people who are Black as well,
That's a really important question, and I think it goes, for me anyway, if anyone wants to jump in, definitely let me know. But I think for me, I think it goes back to, like, maybe I didn't use the right word in terms of conscious colorblindness, but it's this idea that maybe we need to make up a new word, but it's this idea that I see you, I see our differences. Our differences are important, but it doesn't make anyone less or better than anyone else. So like, I see that you have a history that may have been of, like, people of African descent may have a colonial history or colonial past, and I acknowledge that. My ancestors may not have had that sort of history or past, and I acknowledge that too. But it's just this understanding that we are different, but that different is a good thing. If you get that, different is a good thing, and there's nothing better or nothing worse of that difference. That's what, in my head, what I understood in my term of conscious colorblindness. But now with what you were saying, Sarah, maybe I should change.
No, it's just something that came to my mind.
No, definitely. Blessing, did you want to add something there? I think based on Sarah's question.
No, I was just I stayed quiet as well, because I was like trying to listen to what everyone was saying, and like it was a topic that I kind of struggled with a little bit, because it kind of plays into, I don't know, a lot of things that just came into my head, and I remember I was trying to talk to somebody about it, and you know, the first thing that they said to me was that, like, you know, I shouldn't use the words like color blindness. And I was like, what? And like, you know, when it comes to like being a social justice activist for like any type of issue, it just reminded me, talking to her, that, you know, being intersectional with a lot of topics is important. And like, you know, when it comes to language, it's important, you know, on these type of areas. And like, you know, she suggested to me to like, you know, use the word color evasiveness instead and that type of stuff. And that like, you know, disability shouldn't be used as like a metaphor to kind of, I don't know, like when I heard the word colorblindness, I was kind of like, you know, how do we navigate this area? Like, should we still use the word colorblindness when you were talking about like, should we use different words? It was one of the things that came into my head, of, you know, how like, I don't know, when it comes to racism, I don't know, maybe like how, I don't know how to explain, I'm getting nervous now. But it just reminded me with like, you know, of ableism, and as someone with disability, when I saw the word colorblindness come up, I kind of became a bit uncomfortable thinking about it, because I was kind of like, is it an insensitive term now, or, you know, how, like, I don't know if there's like any other words that we can use to kind of, I guess, talk about this in depth. Sorry, I'm getting nervous, but
no, you're totally fine. Like, I think what I'm coming from what you're saying is that we need to find new terminology for describing such a phenomena. I know, like Eric said, it's a very packed term, and
yeah,
it brings up a lot of like things in people's heads that are not most of the time negative. So maybe what we're kind of describing and kind of packing all the things that we want to see moving forward has little like pockets of color blindness in it, but it's not exactly that, and we need to find a new term for it. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, like someone was just telling me about like, you know, how a lot of the times when we're trying to unpack and dismantle racism, how ableism kind of plays in a lot of areas. Like, a lot of the times it's not on purpose, like it's just how society is, you know. And then just with what Gareth was saying, it just reminded me of my experience with like mental health and racism and color blindness, and how like it's so frustrating sometimes being a mental health advocate, because, you know, I do bring up these issues a lot, that, you know, mental health isn't just a separate topic. Like, you know, there's just not diversity or inclusiveness in that area. And, you know, when it comes to racism, a lot of the times I get things said back to me like, you know, oh, we're just like the one race, the human race, and that type of stuff. And I'm like, you know, I can see where they're coming from, and they mean it from a good place. But, you know, to reach to a place of equity, we have to just realize that there's certain privileges that people have, and it's just about, you know, recognizing that, you know.
Yeah, it just reminded me of when you were saying the one race, the human race, and we're going to move to May for the final note, but it was just reminding me of what you were saying. I was teaching a sociology class, right, and one of the students, but like, sure, we all know there's one race, the human race, and I was like, yes, we understand that. We understand that race is a social construct, and we have debunked the fact that race is something that is, let's say, biological or real. But the outcomes of race, the effects of race, both mentally, systemically, economically, those things are 100% real, and we need to, those are the things that we need to unpack, and we need to dissect within ourselves and our societies. So like, just evading the fact and just saying we're all one, like there's one human race, I don't see color, is totally evading and like removing yourself from the effects of understanding that race was a thing for hundreds of years. Like it's only like, was it a couple of, I think I forget what the actual facts, but it's only very recently that race was debunked as not a biological function, and like a biological ingrained thing in human beings. So it's really important that we kind of unpack the effects of racism, which is like colonialism, mental health, systemic oppression, systemic racism, and things like that, and barriers to employment as well. So it's really important to understand those things, and it goes back to colorblindness in like let's say different facets of society. So May, you're the final note here. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking about Sarah's question about like the future of colorblindness and like being able to see like our differences. And I've always kind of used this metaphor for myself when it comes to anything like gender, race, sexuality. So if you take number 6, there's lots of ways you can like create number 6. You can have 2 + 4, 3 + 3, 7 - 1, but even though all the equations are technically different, they all give you the same answer. So they are different but equal. I think that's probably it's okay to be seeing differences. Like, I don't mind being seen as Asian, but as long as I'm also seen as as equal to somebody who's not Asian, because we're all equal. We're all different but equal, basically.
That's a great note to finish on, guys. Thank you so much for that analogy, May. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that in my classes moving forward. It's a really good one, and that's a great note to finish on, guys. Thank you so much again for having this conversation. I hope I kind of learned a lot from you guys, and I hope you guys in the audience kind of learned from everything that you've been listening in the conversation so far. So thank you again for watching. Bye now. Thank you for watching this episode of Gorm TV. So what do you think about today's topic? We'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. And make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. We have new videos coming out every 2 weeks that dissect the social issues that affect Ireland's multicultural generation. And do follow us on social media to join the conversation and be up to date in what we're doing.